the profound loss that the victims from Port Arthur and all of their loved ones to this day are suffering from is compounded by the fact that they have not been given their say. The very fact that we didn't have an open trial about what they experienced, to tell their story, how they felt, was denied to them. To me, that is the greatest disrespect. So the ongoing residual trauma of Port Arthur is something that I feel, honestly and truly, could be alleviated by providing answers.
Welcome to the Wasp Files. Some of this material may be distressing and viewer discretion is advised.
When it comes to any crime, particularly of an evil nature that's committed against the civilian population, it seems to be an uncomfortable reality that most people will always remember the name of the perpetrator, whether it's Ted Bundy or Ed Gein or the Unabomber. However, when it comes to remembering the names of the victims, that's something that seems to fall by the wayside. Some of the criticism that the Wasp Files gets about our endeavours over the last 12 months to dig deep and uncover some of the information that's been locked away by the authorities for a long period of time, and also just to discuss the multitude of discrepancies and anomalies associated with the tragedy, are that it should be left alone, that the victims will be upset by the Wasp Files and my efforts to, in essence, keep the investigation going into this major crime that affected the whole of Australia and certainly had global ramifications and repercussions. So these detractors are very quick to demonise and say that I'm showing a lack of respect. However, I very quickly point out that certainly with my investigations and speaking to many of the people that were personally involved, directly involved with the Port Arthur Massacre, and this includes the police, first responders, and certainly survivors, their families, people associated with Martin Bryant himself, it becomes very clear to me that a lot of people, not just a huge component of the Australian population, want answers. And to me, the disrespect comes from the injustice that the profound loss that the victims from Port Arthur and all of their loved ones to this day are suffering from is compounded by the fact that they have not been given their say. The very fact that we didn't have an open trial means that these witnesses, which could have been called in their hundreds to give their testimony, to be cross-examined, to, in essence, iron out any discrepancies with witness statements, and to be able to have their say about what they experienced, to tell their story, how they felt, was denied to them. I've got good friends that were survivors from the Port Arthur Massacre. One of these is Graham Collier, who's a good friend of mine, and his loss and his experience was traumatic and profound. He was shot on the day, and it was a miracle that he survived, and he lost loved ones. Also, my friend Stephen Howard lost his young wife in the Broad Arrow Cafe. Now, these people were not just passerbys, they were directly involved and affected by this tragedy and were adamant in their calls for, firstly, a coronial inquest into the tragedy, which we never had as well, but also they never got their say in court, nor were they invited to speak on media programs such as the ABC's I Was Actually There. Now, when you consider that this was a person who was directly there, who lost loved ones, who was within spitting distance of the shooter and experienced what they experienced, why have they not been given their say? To me, that is the greatest disrespect. And I've stated quite clearly that I'll talk to anyone associated with the Port Arthur Massacre. detractors and supporters alike. You don't have to support the notion that Port Arthur Massacre may not have gone down the way the mainstream media has portrayed it. But my intention is to give people the chance to tell their story, to have their say. And I don't think that that is something that should be relegated to a dismissal, particularly because this was an event that affected all of us. I often say Port Arthur just blew a hole through the whole of Australia, and we deserve and have the right to have the answers. It should not be up to someone such as myself to conduct an investigation, an analysis, an evaluation and a discussion over 12 months, and prior to that, after 9 exhaustive years of research. Where are the media? Where are the people digging deep? Where are the authorities saying, hang on, we've got a lot of exculpatory evidence here. We've got some witnesses here that are actually contradicting the identity of the gunman and the circumstances of the crime. Where are they? Why have these people just been pushed aside? The impact on the victims and survivors and the first responders. I have the greatest respect for the police and the first responders because they were dealing with an unprecedented tragedy, a trauma that Australia had never been witnessed before, with perhaps exception to the losses of life that were incurred in World War I and World War II. But this was something that shook certainly the quiet rural state of Tasmania to its core and really tested a lot of relationships and the fortitude of some of the people that were affected by that tragedy. Sadly, you could argue that there was an even greater cost after Port Arthur, because I know that some of the police that I had spoken to, their marriages had broken down. I know that there were other people that had committed suicide in relation to their changing viewpoint on the world after Port Arthur, and that is in itself a tragedy. So the ongoing residual trauma of Port Arthur is something that I feel, honestly and truly, could be alleviated by providing answers. One thing I despise is tokenism. It's all very well to get up there and do a commemoration or a memorial. But to me, in some ways, I felt that the authorities, which certainly did not treat the survivors from the Port Arthur Massacre with any degree of respect, and that includes financially. To this day, I am astounded by the fact that there hasn't been a major class action against the Tasmanian government, which ran the Broad Arrow Cafe and the tourist site itself. And this included foreigners who had lost their lives on that day. Somehow or other, the government of the day had managed to avoid a class action, which, given the nature of that crime, could possibly have shut down that government. But it's all about, I do care about the people that I speak to. Secondary to the main focus of the Wasp Files, which is to educate people on what they don't know about Port Arthur, and certainly help them to begin a discussion to at least debate the various aspects of the crime. Primary is basically to give people their say, and that includes all of the people that comment. The Wasp Files has had something like 3 million views. As I've stated, this is not a popularity contest. I'm not interested in being a social influencer or an activist, but it is very heartening to me to give people the chance to have their say. That's why I welcome everyone that comments on the Wasp Files, whether it be detractors or supporters. Of course, people that just hurl abuse, well, they're not there to provide a reasonable debate, and I usually block them. But the whole point is we're all here to try and get answers. And the people that need those answers, in my opinion, are the victims, the survivors, and their relatives and families. They're the ones that have to deal with the legacy of Port Arthur, including the entire Tasmanian community. I know for a fact that a lot of people down in Tasmania have the opinion that Port Arthur stinks and that they have been denied the answers as well. So I have to finish up by saying that anyone that just thinks that the best way to deal with a crime of this magnitude is to sweep it under the rug, and certainly the media to just portray a one-sided approach to this crime and to, in essence, totally ignore the needs of the victims and to speak to the other side, that to me is the greatest disrespect. And that is the thing that should be attacked, not the Wasp Files for trying to do the opposite.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Wasp Files. New episodes will be uploaded every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Feel free to share far and wide, and please see the links to the Dropbox files and information relating to the episodes. Also, without any obligation, please see the Buy Me a Coffee campaign, which helps keep the channel running and also provides profits to my friends who are survivors from Port Arthur who have supported me on this journey. Thank you.